Bienvenidos a Padre Hijo Discuten Cómics. Disfruten de nuestra charla, nuestra segunda parte de la charla con Dan Gvozden.
Spider-Man. What would you say, because those are Dan Slott, the constructing the character. What would you say is the core of Spider-Man? What moves you and me to be fans of this character?
For me, the thing that really draws me into Spider-Man is the like everyman status of the character. I just like how relatable Peter Parker is. And I think this has kind of been missing in a lot of recent comics, is that like Peter Parker has problems like outside of supervillainy and fighting supervillains, and that's the stuff that gets me most excited. And all the thought bubbles that like allow us into Peter Parker's mind. I really like how much of a kind of like dope he is, because we're all that way. And, that really is the thing that engages with me. It's like, I just like that I can relate to Peter. He's not perfect. He fails a lot, which actually was really evident in Superior Spider-Man. He does a number of things that are not great in that comic, which a lot of people had real problems with. But to me, it made it even more relatable because I could see myself making similar mistakes. But I like, Spider-Verse, the Into the Spider-Verse movie really gets it, I think, to me, which is like every time he gets knocked down or makes a mistake, he finds a way to get back up again and try harder. And, I like the power and responsibility stuff too. Like, I think that's all kind of like tied into it. And I feel like that way about my show. It's like I have the power to do a great show but the responsibility to bring people together, and so that's kind of infused a lot of my life. For me, it's all about Peter and his relatability and his life and interruptions Spider-Man brings to it. It's why I love the Spider-Man 2 movie, because it's 2 hours of someone just beating Peter Parker up. And I find that endlessly amusing. I don't know why. Maybe I just like secretly hate Peter Parker. What I love about it is just like, he's just like me. They even say that in Into the Spider-Verse. You're like me. And that's what I connect to. And I think that's why it's such a shame that the fandom online can be so mean and vitriolic and nasty to each other. Is ideally, we should be all in this together, not fighting each other and arguing with each other. Like, it's about inclusivity. Like, anyone can wear the mask. Well, so then live it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Spider-Man movie?
My favorite Spider-Man movie is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I just think it really captures the character. I think the animation is probably the best I've ever seen. I just think there's no movie like it. I mean, Spider-Man 2 is excellent and one of my favorite movies of all time, but Into the Spider-Verse is, I think even if it wasn't Spider-Man, it would still be in my top movies of all time. It's really just that good. So, that movie is my favorite.
It's a great
movie.
I need another figure of that Dr. Octopus.
Oh, yeah?
In my collection. Yeah.
I love it.
I need one. Yeah. I was going to ask you, what do you think is one of the greatest achievements in the show, or an interview or something that you are most proud of in your show?
That's a great question. We've had a lot of like big interviews that really have become special to me. My favorite like personal interview, I think, was my first interview with Ron Frenz at the Baltimore Comic-Con. Ron is like my favorite person in comics, artist Ron Frenz, if you aren't familiar. I went up to him at Baltimore Comic-Con, and we had talked years prior. I was waiting in line to meet him, and he was doing a commission for someone. And the person said, "Can you write on that commission? With great power comes great responsibility." And he was like, I will not write that because that's the wrong quote. That's not what the quote is. Yeah. And I said, yes, because it's with great power, there must also come great responsibility.
Yeah.
And he was like, you're right. How would you like a free commission? And I was like, what? You know, like so excited. And so he gave me my first commission ever. It's actually right over my desk right now. And,
Okay.
you know, he was so nice. So when we had the show, I went back to Baltimore and I said like, hey, Ron, I'd love to interview you. And he was like, I would love to do an interview with you. But he's like, but I have to go do all these commissions. Do you want to come back to my apartment with me? So we went back to his like apartment or his hotel room, and he did commissions while I asked him questions. And he was just so giving of his time and so friendly. We got really intimate. Like we really got to know each other through the interview to the point that like he started to cry during one of the answers to one of the questions. And to me, it was like, here's a guy being so open and honest about his feelings about the character. Like Ron is probably the best guy to like promote Spider-Man and the love of Spider-Man. So that one means a lot to me personally. You know, there's been other big ones that I've really enjoyed doing. Like I loved having Howard Mackey and Terry Kavanaugh on my show to talk about the Clone Saga, because that
was a great show.
They really like opened up about like the problems with the Clone Saga, and that was really entertaining to me. You know, we had Gerry Conway on our show 7 times, and he's always an excellent guest. I remember the first time we had him on, I was physically shaking. I was so nervous to talk to Gerry Conway, and now he's like an old friend of mine. So like that kind of shows like, you know, I have an interesting changing relationship with the people that I talk to. But yeah, I mean, there's so many great ones. It was great to talk to. On the other hand, it was great to talk to Christopher Priest on our 200th episode. If only because he was like a white whale for Mark and I. Like we could just never get him, and that we managed to get him and got to ask him questions about like him firing Ron Friends.
Do you know why it's important, Christopher Priest? No?
No.
It's one of the darker times in Amazing Spider-Man comics, because there was a writer who created Hobgoblin, and he had the idea of who he was going to be. But then he got fired, or he got just quit the
He
the
was
title,
actually
right?
hired.
So,
He was hired to take on the Avengers.
Okay, so he went and left the mystery, and then another creator came, who was Tom DeFalco, who had an idea of who the Hobgoblin was going to be, and he also created the Rose. So he said, okay, this guy is going to be the Rose, and this guy is going to be Hobgoblin. And at that time, Christopher Priest was the editor of Amazing Spider-Man, and he decided to fire Tom DeFalco, and he just put the characters and said, okay, Hobgoblin is going to be this reporter,
Ned Leeds.
Ned Leeds, and the Rose is going to be Richard Fisk. So I grew up thinking that was the natural solution for that secret. Did I tell the story?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right?
Yeah, in broad strokes. Yeah. So like Ron Friends and Tom DeFalco blame Christopher Priest for firing them like out of nowhere just because he didn't like them. So when Mark and I are obsessed with the Hobgoblin, Mark even more so than me. So that we got to talk to Christopher Priest and push him about this was like, you know, he was very nice about it. But like I don't think Ron Friends was very happy that we were so nice to Christopher Priest on our show, because he blames Christopher Priest for removing him from his dream job. So, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, but that like we were very nervous that we wrote all these questions before we went over there. Like, okay, how do we address this without pissing him off? You know, how do we handle this the right way? So,
He had refused to talk about that period of time, right? In the past.
he had, yeah. He had recently opened up about it on a blog post where he decided to kind of talk a little bit more about it. And we thought the way to talk to him was because he had a new Spider-Man comic coming out called Spider Force during like one of the Spider-Verse sequels. And we thought, okay, he's writing Spider-Man comics again. So that's our bridge to talk to him. And, you know, I ended up working out. He was very nice. And he even agreed to come back on the show. So we're hoping to get, you know, him back on again in the future to get into more detail about it. But yeah, I mean, there's been so many cool ones, like getting Christopher Daniel Barnes on the show, who did the voice for Peter Parker in the 90s cartoon, was really neat. We've done, I think, over 100 interviews, and each one has been exciting for kind of its own reason. Do you have any favorites that I'm forgetting?
Basically, the Howard Mackie. I actually met him a couple of times. I saw him here in Mexico in La Mole Comic Con, and then in New York. And I actually told him that he was very open in the interview he did for you, and that he was a very nice guy, because he was very open in your interview. Which one? I always like when you Gerry Conway is one of my favorites, especially the 80s run. I grew up hating Tombstone because of what he had made to Robbie Robertson.
Yeah.
Robbie Robertson is one of my favorite characters, and this game that the writers and the public has, when we never know if Robbie is aware that Peter is a Spider-Man. But there are many clues that and scenes where it seems that like Robbie Robertson knows that Peter is a Spider-Man. So I like that character a lot, and his son, of course, Randy. So whenever you have Gerry Conway in the show, is very nice. Which other? I like your reviews in general, and I like the new. If you want to talk a little bit of what you are doing now with Mark in the show, because that's also very interesting. As I told you, I have read since I was a kid. I started reading the Stan Lee, John Romita issues. So it's very interesting to me to see how the character has evolved during all these eras or decades. So if you want to tell us a little bit of what you are doing right now in the show.
Sure. So a few years ago, Mark and I started doing what we call our seasonal content. So we've been kind of working our way season by season through creative runs or periods of time in Spider-Man's history. And we're not just talking about the comics, we're talking about all the associated media and pop culture around the character. So that's like records, toys, TV shows. We had Ralph Bakshi on, which was really incredible. You know, we're really looking at the whole history of the character, because my love of the character has really grown beyond the comics to kind of everything. Like we call it like a transmedia property. And I'm very curious because it's funny how much, if you look at something very specifically, you realize that it's connected to everything. And Spider-Man, being the big character that he is connected to every facet of our lives. They even make a joke out of it Into the Spider-Verse, where he's a cereal, he's a Christmas album, he's an everything, you know? And so that has really been an interesting way for us to look at the character, yes, but also look at culture over the years. And that's one of my favorite things about collecting it. Like, I own the 9/11 issue of of Amazing Spider-Man. And I know that one day, if I show the issue to any kid that I have, it's a great opportunity to talk about that event and to first kind of enter into that world. And that's what's exciting to me about our show now, is that it's kind of become more of a historical artifact. I also joke that, like, so I got my master's degree in cinema studies, and I joke that, like, I didn't like that experience, but this is my real thesis paper. Like, I'm writing like a novel in a way by doing this show. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward. Eventually, someday we'll catch up to Superior Spider-Man, and we'll have documented the whole history of Spider-Man, if one can claim to have done that.
Yeah, you are doing a decade per show, right?
Yeah, kind of. So right now we're doing like the late 70s, early 80s. We're kind of taking it by like important moments in Spider-Man's history. So like right now, like the late 70s, early 80s is kind of an awkward time for Spider-Man. And so it's a short season. But next season is going to be all about like Roger Stern and his run and Spectacular Spider-Man and how the Black Cat and Spider-Man were an item at the time. And like that's when the character. What'd you say?
The black costume.
Yeah, that too. That'll come into play. So that's going to be a really jam-packed season, and I expect that as time goes on, the length of time covered in a season will get smaller and smaller because there's just going to be so much to talk about. I mean, if we were to even just cover like, let's say we're covering 2000 to 2010, well, you've got like 4 Spider-Man movies, video games, great series. I mean, where do you draw the line? So it's going to be interesting to see how we cover all of this stuff as time goes on.
Do you think there's a moment that changed Spider-Man forever?
Other than Uncle Ben's death, I think the most important moment in the history of the character is probably Gwen Stacy's death. I think it really changed the tone of the comic. It went from being Spider-Man and his adventures and, you know, bad things would happen with like the Green Goblin and things like that, but nothing really that made the stakes of the book life and death. And killing off Gwen suggested that you could do pretty much anything in a Spider-Man comic, and I don't think the comic has ever been the same again. And I think that has pluses and minuses. I think the comic is like needlessly dark and obsessed with death a lot ever since then, and I don't think it needs to be. But on the other hand, like it's way more interesting because you know anything could happen to the character. And so it kind of goes back and forth. And I think sometimes the writers get a little too caught up on like who's going to die when that really shouldn't be the stakes we're dealing with. But like it is nice to know that there's real danger in the life of Spider-Man. And I don't think the book has ever been the same since.
Yeah. And what else are you reading from the big two?
So I have Marvel Unlimited, and I made a goal for myself because for a long time I've wanted to work at Marvel. Like that's kind of my dream. I don't know that I could ever achieve that dream because of a number of reasons, but I decided like if I'm going to work at Marvel, I'm going to read every new book that they publish so that I can be on top of what's going on at the company. Now, I don't do that anymore, but I'm pretty close to doing that. I read almost every title that they put out right now, or at least I give every title a number 1 read, and I say, do I like the first issue? Okay, I'll keep reading. So I'm like about 6 months behind on most things that aren't Spider-Man related, but I read pretty much every book that Marvel puts out. There's some I enjoy more than others. Like I think Immortal Hulk is really great right now. I really like the Punisher book that they're putting out. The X-Men line has been really excellent recently. There's just a lot of really great stuff going on. The Web of Black Widow was a really good miniseries. Marvel's putting out a ton of great content. Not at this moment. Nothing's coming out right now. But there's been a lot of really good stuff. From DC, I tend to pick up like big books that they do, like Mr. Miracle or any big Batman book that they put out. If I hear really good word of mouth about it, I'll pick it up. I started reading a lot of DC during the Rebirth event, but eventually I burned out, and I'm just not as into the DC world as I am Marvel. It just didn't connect with me other than like Batman. So I like Superman and I like a number of their characters, but I kind of wait to hear if they're good or not. I mostly spend a lot of my time, if I'm not reading Marvel, I'm reading Image books and other kind of indie titles. Like I love the Black Hammer books from Dark Horse. I think in terms of superhero books, I think those are the best things that are coming out right now. I loved Invincible, and when that ended, it was like I need to find a new big superhero title to fall in love with, and Black Hammer is the one that I like now. And I really like, in terms of Robert Kirkman, I really like his new Oblivion Song series. I think it's excellent. I I'll read anything Donny Cates puts out. I think his stuff is incredible. His Venom series is one of my favorite things to read. I read a lot. That's like almost what I spend most of my free time doing is just reading comics and preparing for the show. The show is a lot of work. So, you know.
Yeah.
What do you prefer, the past or the present in comics? The stories of the past or the stories of the present in comics?
That's a great question. I think comics have always been good. You know, like I don't know that I have a preference. It's kind of like based on the story that I'm reading. There's a lot of old Spider-Man comics that I love, but for different reasons than the stuff I love today. I think the writing today tends to be more sophisticated and more nuanced and has a real kind of like vision in a way that a lot of the older stuff didn't. But I don't think that they were trying to do that. They were trying to do like fun books you'd pick up every month. And I think some of that is lost today. But I kind of read them for different things. If I want to just enjoy myself for 20 minutes, I prefer the old stuff. If I really want to get really involved in comics, I like the new stuff. Like if I was doing a show that reviewed every single issue of Stan Lee's Spider-Man, I don't think it would be very interesting to listen to because it wasn't trying to do what today's comics are doing. Today's comics are more like television shows where it's kind of like one long idea spread out over a lot of comics, which makes it kind of fun to talk about because I can do that thing where I speculate and come up with what the writer is trying to say. And I don't know that that was really, you know, all that was the idea of old comics. I mean, Stan would do things like discuss race relations or drug abuse, and those are really interesting. But I don't think I would want to talk for an hour about like how Spider-Man was punching the kangaroo. So, you know, I think each one has their benefits. So it's hard for me to say, but I think comics overall, like today, I get more excited about reading like new ideas from people today than I do about digging through like endless back catalogs. That being said, I read a lot of old comics, so, you know.
Yeah, I like guys like Chris Claremont or Peter David that have a long, they have short stories, but a long vision of the character. And especially Peter David with the Hulk, every issue had a small story, but also it was constructing something around his personality and this idea that he had different beings living inside him. So, yeah, I agree with your vision. You have another question for? No? Okay, Dan, you usually end your interviews asking the creators what do they think their impact is for the character. So I want to ask you the same. How does it feel to spread the word for a character as important as beloved as Spider-Man?
Well, I'm moved to answer that question. I don't know that I've really had any impact on the character itself, although I know Nick Spencer used to listen to the show, so I don't know how that has kind of impacted the character. But yeah, I mean, it means, the thing that means the most to me, weirdly, is we have this thing called the Slack for my show where people can kind of gather and talk about Spider-Man. And I'm so proud that the conversations that take place in that Slack are very respectful and very, it's reflective of what I think the comics community is at the best of times, which is friendly, supportive, and in love with comics. Like we have a channel in our Slack that's all about collecting, and people from our Slack just mail comics to each other if people are missing holes in their collections. And to me, like that those people have signed up to be a part of our Slack forum suggests that we've created a space that cultivates those people or brings those people together, which to me says that our show is doing something positive. and it's what I wanted the fandom of Spider-Man to look like. And so for me, I get the most joy out of hearing from our fans and listeners about how much they love the character or the crazy stories from their lives, because that was what was missing in my life. I don't really have people like, as much as my wife, I force her to listen to me talk about Spider-Man, I don't have many people in my life that I get to talk to about this stuff. So like, for me, it's the friendships made along the way. I'm so glad that I bumped into you in California, because now we're going to be lifelong friends. And, Mark, who is a stranger on the internet, who's doing my show with me, he was in my wedding a few years back. And, I didn't even know this guy. And then within a span of a couple of years, he's like my closest friend. And, that means more to me than anything Spider-Man related. Like, it's just kind of the people you meet along the way. It's great that I know Gerry Conway and I would consider him a friend, or Ron Friend's a friend, and they're heroes of mine, and that means a lot. But
who would have thought that was possible?
Yeah,
right?
I never thought it was possible, but like, it's, for me, it's more the kind of like revealing the human beings behind all of it all that really makes it fun. And, it's also just kind of like a project that I get to work on, and everybody needs something to do. And that people have connected with what I put out there means a lot to me. I mean, we have so many supporters that that I don't know, and I would love to know them. And, so anyway, I don't know if that's really an answer to your question. I just want to kind of spread positivity and love for the character, and comics as a medium. It's a medium that gets trashed a lot and people don't treat seriously. And if I can do even the smallest bit to promote the medium as an art form on the level with filmmaking or writing a novel, then, I feel like I've done something good, because you and your son are bonding over comics, and, I know I learned to read, and a lot of my vocabulary and stuff is based on what I read in Stan Lee's books. Like, I just think there's so many positive things to come out of this medium that I love. Again, if I can just convince anyone to love this and to be respectful of each other, and there are different opinions, I think then I'm really doing something good. I think it's actually a shame that Mark and I agree so much, because I would love to argue with him respectfully, but we end up just agreeing on mostly everything. So we don't get those moments very often, which is why it's so funny that we start our show off by arguing about annuals, because it ultimately doesn't matter. And that's the real joke, is that like, we don't really care. And anyway, that's the spirit, I think, of what I want to see comics fandom becoming. And also a kind of like respect for people who create stuff. Like the Howard Mackey episode, Mark and I hate Howard Mackey's writing. It's really not good. But like, he's a guy, and I wanted to hear what he had to say, and he got to work on a character that I love, and why not treat him with respect and really find out where he's coming from?
Yeah, and sometimes those are the best interviews. Guys like him, you expect that the great interview is going to be this great super writer or super artist, and sometimes people like Howard Mackey tell the most interesting stories.
Absolutely. I wish I could get Denny O'Neil on my show, because he's been the butt of our jokes for a long time, and I don't know that I ever will, but I would love to find out like what was going on in his life that like made him write those very weird Spider-Man stories.
Yeah, we would also like to have him, but because of his work in Batman.
Yeah, no, he's very famous for Batman.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you very much for your time and ask you, where can we find you?
Sure, yeah. You can find me online, Amazing Spider Talk. You can just search for it anywhere and you'll find it. AmazingSpiderTalk.com will give you all the information you need to keep up with us and subscribe and stuff. We do live shows every Sunday night at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. So that's tonight. I got like 3.5 hours to go live on another show. So come join us there on YouTube. But if you want to reach out to me and follow me, I'm on Twitter. I'm at SupSpiderTalk. I'd love to kind of have everybody along for the ride. And if you have a show like your guys' great show, like, let me know. I follow you guys. Okay, I don't speak Spanish the best, but I took 5 years of it in school. So I watch, and it's helped me out with the language. So I'm all about just spreading the love. So thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dan.